So, hi, my name's Peter Lennon and I run a small marketing agency called Consultants Marketing. And today I wanted to talk to you about demand planning and what that actually means and how does demand planning fit into a supply chain overall planning process. It's really important to plan for demand, and you could almost think of demand as a forecast or a way of predicting what your sales will be in the future, and therefore that will allow you to communicate to your raw materials, your materials planning teams, your production teams, and ultimately your supply planning colleagues to build up the right amount of inventory for the demand that you anticipate you're going to need. So you can see on the model here, effective demand planning is collaborative in that it works very much with supply chain, working with marketing and finance, and really understanding what the forecast is, and it's not having two different forecasts for the same thing, which can often happen in some organisations. It's very much about having one forecast and making inventory according to that forecast. So what is the demand planning objective? Well, it's ultimately, as I said, it's to predict future customer demand. The time horizon of that can be quite extensive. It can be up to 1.5 years out, which they in the industry call a long range forecast, or it could be more short term trends in terms of spikes in demand. So it could be seasonality, key holidays, or to cover promotional periods that you've got planned. And that normally is between 1 day and about 4 weeks, normally in duration. On the diagram here, you can see the short-term horizon is 1 to 14 days. Sometimes if you're running a promotion and it's over a month, it may be how is that promotion going to influence demand in that promotional period. And what are the principles of demand planning? Are very much about accurate forecasting to avoid any excess stock being produced, but also to make sure that you don't have availability problems, so but your supply chain produces the right amount of finished goods, produces the right amount of inventory to fulfill the demand that you anticipate. Now, obviously, you won't always get demand right in terms of the forecasting models that you're using, but it needs to be very clear what needs to be produced or sourced if those goods are being bought in. So if they're purchased finished goods, for instance, and you're buying them in from a third-party manufacturer, you're very much working to the demand plan and the forecast. So a sophisticated demand planning function would work with marketing intelligence. It would understand the impact of pricing on driving demand. It would also look at any periods of sales that you've got that may cannibalise sales for the products that you've got in your core offer. So that needs to be considered. It also needs to consider the role of innovation and forecasting how the market, so how the customer will receive the innovations, and what the rate of sales will be on those new product introductions. So if you don't have a strong demand plan, then you're going to have all sorts of things. You're going to have excess stock being produced. So inaccurate forecasts mean that you could have stockpiles of excess stock, which means that ultimately at the end of the year you could be selling that at a much larger discount than you intended to. And this will obviously affect profitability, and it will take a lot of management time to work that stock through. you could be placing unnecessary strain upon the supply chain in terms of the forecasting being too high, too optimistic, and that supply production effort could be placed elsewhere to produce more products and more evenly spread out the resources in your manufacturing facilities as opposed to stockpiling on certain items. So this is quite important. The other one is around stockouts and late orders or availability back orders. What you're trying to avoid is avoiding disappointing the customer. So having availability is absolutely essential. When I worked in quite large corporate functions, we did work to 98.5% availability as a target. And many large retailers and self-manufacturing companies will work to something quite similar. Ultimately, what you don't want is dissatisfied customers and customers that may go elsewhere in the instance, but you can't supply them with the product that they need and want. So the final part to this demand planning scenario in that, but what you don't want is a poor demand plan, because it means that you're not planning for demand in a smooth way, and it will become quite erratic and piecemeal, and that will take a lot of excess management time. So some would say, do you need a forecast at all? Well, it's quite an interesting question. I mean, ultimately, if you're just literally drop shipping, so you're producing a load of goods and then you're pushing them through the supply chain to your distributors, then the risk is with the distributors who take on that product. So in that scenario, maybe it's for the distributors to get the forecasting right, because you're just producing a quantity to supply them. I mean, ultimately, what you want to do is you want to produce the stock and have a rough idea of what the customer demand is, so the whole supply chain works smoother. In some industries, it's sale or return. In the magazines industry, for instance, it's run on a sale or return basis. So when I worked for the BBC in trade marketing, the efficiency was about 80%. So what actually happened is, but the retailers would return back to us about 20% of everything we produced, and that needs to be built into the margins as well. So what you could do is you could run a make to order sort of system. So in effect, the orders are placed, you have a very small amount of stock, but you continue to make to the orders. That will mean potentially a longer lead time for customers. So car manufacturers work in this way, where they have quite low stocks, they make to order, which is why sometimes you have to wait 9 months for your car. A decoupling point is basically a point in the supply chain where the actions stop being order driven and they're forecast driven. So in effect, what that means is you may produce a certain amount of base stock, but then you would look at your overall forecasts, and then in the short term, maybe in a 6-month horizon, you would then produce according to your forecasts and adjust production if you see a strong drop in demand in the marketplace, or increase it if you're seeing strong increases on a monthly basis. So you may actually reforecast every week, and you will adjust the amount of stock that you think you need for the next 6 months. Do you need a forecast at all? Well, I think the answer is overwhelmingly yes, you do, because you need to know where to allocate your stock within what regions of the country, or if it's internationally, within what countries do you need what amount of stock. You need to understand how much working capital you will need in the business to produce the stock that you forecasted for. Having a forecast is a good way to work, but there'll always be a buffer stock as well. So if there's a deviation versus what you forecasted, you should be okay if you produced a buffer stock which will cope with normal variations in demand. So generally in supply chain, the average percentage error of a forecast is normally plus or minus about 40-ish%. So you may produce 140 units if you think your forecast is 40, and normally that will be okay to deal with any spikes in demand. But sometimes there can be anomalies, and you can get a huge spike in demand, and you're going to be in problems then, because you're not going to have enough stock to fulfill that demand in the short term. So it very much depends upon what the lead time is in your supply chain, according to how much you produce and when you produce it. So if, for instance, you have a lead time of 6 weeks and you've had a spike in demand within a certain month, to stabilise that situation, it may take 6 weeks to be back straight again, because you've got a 6-week lead time. So you can't respond in an agile way when you've got such a long lead time. So the lead time is the amount of time that it takes from when you become aware that you need to increase your production to the time when your inventory will hit its point of sale, so the customer can buy it. Many businesses like fashion or like cosmetics are quite complicated. As you can see at the top on the diagram here, they actually run on very complicated supply chains, because you've got a lot of variation in the core item. And you can see that here when you've got jumpers and you've got 8 different splits of colour. And you know, the difficulty with this scenario is that you've got to actually produce the base core item, but then you've got to produce all the colour variations or the shade splits in the world that I used to work in, which was in cosmetics, in lipsticks for instance. You may have up to 40 different shades. So you may use beeswax as part of your core product, but then all the different colours